I'm going to talk about a different aspect of digitization in IVF. And this talk now is going to be about the blockchain in IVF. So full disclosure, I am a consultant clinical embryologist. I am the managing director of embryology internationally for Tomorrow. I work very closely with Kai, who's going to be talking about that project. I am a lecturer at Imperial College London, and I am the CSO of Apricity, which I will be talking about today. But this aspect of the project is non-profit, it's open source, and it's about providing a road of collaboration. So why did we start this project? Well, healthcare data is incredibly sensitive. And for that reason, it requires standards for data processing. We need to respect the fact that the data that we have on the embryos, on the sperm, on the eggs, on the patients, this data requires privacy and confidentiality to respect the needs from the patient. So if it's identifiable information, we have a whole set of regulation that's in place to ensure that that privacy and confidentiality is met. We also need to respect traceability and transparency. So all the interactions with local data should be tracked. We need to know what's happening whenever somebody is accessing this very sensitive information regarding our patients. We need to know what data was accessed, when, by whom, and for what purpose at all times. And the responsibility of this lies with the clinic. We need to have accountability in order. So the data controller, which is the clinic, has to fully control who accesses this data at all times. And security must be in place to make sure that no unauthorized access is even possible. And all of these are done within the context of ethics. So it's not just about maintaining the data safe and secure, but it's also whoever does have access to it, whoever is granted access to it, is going to use the data for the right purposes and with the correct consequences. So what we have at the moment around healthcare data, there's a whole blanket that protects it, which is around these 5 principles. So how do we learn from clinical data? And this slide is purposefully complex to show that it's a bit of a journey. So if we go to step 1, the moment that the patient has their treatment, we have to get their consent, step 2, or you move on to step 3 when the data is collected for clinical decision making, and then step 4 when the data is organized, processed, stored, and protected. And the duty for this green part of the roadmap is kept by the clinic. But then comes the point where a researcher has a curiosity and wants to ask a question that will hopefully enhance the standards of care for patients going forward. So the researcher asks this question, but in order to be able to target the question onto the data, they, in some countries, will require regulatory approval, which is step 6. They might require specific ethics approval for specific projects. They might require research permissions specific to the center who's holding the research. And then finally, when they've gone through all those steps, they start conducting the research. They start collecting the data, analyzing the data, then they publish it. Then it gets appraised by the general professionals and key opinion leaders of the field. And only then do we start considering having the learnings from this data applied in clinical practice. But to go from step 1 to step 10 can take months, if not years. So what I'm thinking about here is is there a way that we can streamline the research process while still preserving the key standards regarding the safety of the data, regarding the ethics of the data, regarding all those 5 steps, privacy, confidentiality, and making sure that all those are still protected. And in fact, COVID-19 has brought an environment that has made this possible, or has brought the need for this to become reality. This was published in The Economist. The pandemic has spawned a new way to study medical records. And they are talking at precisely this, how instead of taking months or years, within 42 days, they have gone from an idea to publication. And it's this change in how data is processed and how research is conducted in terms of access and permissions. It's this change that is bringing the questions that we're talking about today. It has allowed for a very fast response in a COVID-19 pandemic. So that's a little bit on why we would want to streamline the research process. But what about that first step, from the moment the patient has treatment to before the researcher has the question, that part inside the clinic, streamlining the data capture and streamlining that processing? How do we do it today, and can we streamline that so that we can speed up the progress of knowledge within the field of fertility? So the HFEA National Registry is what we call a centralized data system. It fulfills the regulatory needs. It's been designed for that purpose, and it allows the regulator to check that the clinics are performing to the standards of care that they should be performing in order to provide the service to the patients. We have spent a lot of time analyzing the data in the HFEA National Registry to see what can be learned from it. We have submitted an abstract that will be presented at the ESHRE conference in 2020, which will also be virtual. And we kind of discussed what is it that we can learn from the 1 million cycles that we have in the UK registry data set. And we have several examples in there where, despite the size of the data set, despite the fact that you have 1 million cycles of data, when we're looking at specific cohorts, we start getting insufficient data points to conclude on the best clinical practice. In other examples, we have missing data types, for instance, more details on the embryo quality, whether the patient experienced OHSS or not, the clinical and laboratory practices in individual places, which might have an impact in terms of the question you're trying to answer. And we also had inaccuracies, particularly in the area of the type of infertility. And this is because we need to revisit not only the way that the data is brought together, but also the way that the data is collected, and in this case, to try and streamline the inaccuracies. So let's go through just one of these examples. So we wanted to ask the question, which we presented this at the Fertility 2020 in January, which was presented in Edinburgh. And the question was, what is the impact of the number of fresh eggs collected on treatment outcome? So if you look at the number of eggs collected according to each age group, you see here a frequency distribution of where they lie. What you can see is that in green you have, I've got sufficient data to start answering this question, and the red section is, well, we don't have enough data. What you see is that the older the patient, or the larger the number of eggs, we start getting to the area where I actually can't answer the question in this particular phenotype. So if she's 40 years old and she's got 26 eggs, I have no idea whether we should be pushing this patient more or not. So to answer the simple question, the impact of number of fresh eggs collected on treatment outcome, we can only do that for a certain group of patients. But if we start asking, but now I want to know within each subgroup of the quality of the embryo, we no longer have enough data in any of the cohorts if we start breaking it down to the imagery of that particular embryo. So once if we want to be able to answer these questions, we need more than 1 million data points. To get 1 million more than that, we need to go beyond the country. And now many countries around the world have their own centralized data. And what would be a nice solution would be if we could bring it all together into one big data pool. But this is not realistic, this is not possible, and the legality of most of these countries wouldn't permit such an exercise. So we need a different solution. The consequence that we have in the IVF sector by handling limited data in our research projects when we're doing cohort studies is that it leads to contradicting research. And this contradictive research leads to inconclusive metadata, which eventually leads to differences in practice around the world with patients of similar characteristics. And this is what we're trying to change. These inconsistencies in care standards need to be ironed out. And also we need a space to validate in a safe way the new technologies that are coming forward. So Dean mentioned all the technologies associated with identifying which embryo we should be transferring back or not. Deep learning is going to bring a lot of database tools into clinical practice, and they're only going to be able to be useful if we're able to validate them. So Bill Gates is a big fan of artificial intelligence, but he believes that it's not just about bringing AI into the world, it's about how do we bring AI into the world in an ethical manner? How do we make it accessible, not just for the rich patients, but for all patients? And we're hoping that this is how we can help. AI is clearly an emerging topic in the field of fertility. And we have another abstract that we'll be presenting at ESHRI, where we have analyzed the past 2 years of what's been happening with the publications and presentations at ASRM, ESHRI, and the Fertility Conference, which is the main conference in the UK. And we can clearly see that the interest in the topic is increasing. ESHRI this year has several sections who are focused entirely on deep learning. But the quality of the projects that we're putting forward is not great. We are handling insufficient sample sizes, and they're not diverse enough for us to be able to make the tools that we need to make for the patients going forward, not in a safe manner anyway. And for deep learning standards, it needs more data if we want to improve clinical application. We also need to think about the fact that the data presented on AI at the conferences in the last 2 to 3 years have all had very varied efficacy levels. And this goes to all the abstracts. They all lacked, even when you included the presentation, even when you included the publications that came in papers afterwards, they lacked sufficient details on the algorithm structure to allow for suitable scrutiny as to the validity of the claims being put forward. So these 3 things need to be resolved. But the problem is the way that we're centralizing this data is hindering. So AI progress in IVF is hindered by the ineffective cohort studies, which have insufficient, poor quality, and biased data sets. The solution is not a centralized pool of data from around the world. So we've covered that is just not going to be possible. So we can use technology instead to do a decentralized data hub without a central authority. This is what we call a democratized data hub. The beauty of this system is that data never leaves the control of the clinic. The clinic holds the data and physically has the data under their control, which is where the data should always be. What travels from clinic to clinic are the algorithms. The algorithms go into the clinic, they learn from the clinic, they then move on to the next clinic, and they become smarter and smarter as they go from one clinic to the next, until eventually they come back, not with the data, but just the metadata sufficient to be able to determine whether this AI tool works or doesn't work. Is it time to have it clinically available? In order to make this comply with the standards of how healthcare data should be handled, it's built around blockchain. Now, blockchain improves data transactions in 5 easy steps. I'm just going to try and break it down so that us embryologists can understand it. Researcher A requests access to data from clinic B. That's the first step. You make a request for access to data. This request is then recorded as a block. Next thing that happens is that the network verifies and manages a transaction through a cluster of computers. So all these computers, all these servers that are in this blockchain network, each of them is going to verify that this is correct. And this is what makes it so secure, because it's not possible for us to go around and fake with every single one of these computers. They all are working simultaneously together. The next step, if the security is granted, it goes through the hyperledger technology, and this ensures that the access is permitted. So predefined permissions are kind of put forward, and what then happens is that B receives a transaction request from clinic A. It's gone through all those checks, it's gone through all of this information, and each of these steps, step 1, step 2, step 3, has created blocks which are intertwined. And each of these blocks are records which are completely immutable. Once they are created, they cannot be changed. And this is what creates the traceability. You know at all times who requested data from who, when was the access permitted or was the access not granted. And this provides the accountability within this network. So lastly, this isn't an interaction from one person to the next. This is an interaction of many people to many people. And this creates unlimited transactions, which hopefully will bring unlimited progress. So this is what blockchain is in very simple terms. So what Apricity has done is that they brought together this decentralized structure with the blockchain. And the hope is that we can then obtain more and better quality data, not just for a single entity, but all the clinics working collaboratively around the world. The framework is designed for collaborative fertility data science projects, so it's specific for fertility. And it's designed to facilitate secure data sharing between the clinics to make sure that it's safe, secure, ensure it's traceable and accountable, that it guarantees confidentiality and privacy, and that information governance and regulatory aspects are fully compliant. It reduces the cost of innovation and validation of implementation. So rather than organizing $1 million RCTs, we can validate all these tools for embryo selection using this system in a much more cost-effective manner. And the hope is that if we can make more cost-effective validation, we can now not only make it safer for implementation, but hopefully reduce the cost of IVF over time, making IVF more accessible. It enhances evidence-based medicine as well. So the hope is that we can then bring more consistency and improve the standards of care through collaborative research. The projects that we're doing can be broken down into 4 aspects. The first one is that at university level, we're trying to provide the skills for the future generation of embryologists. So we are teaching them about coding. We're teaching them about AI. Because in the future, there's going to be 2 types of embryologists in the world. The ones who tell AI what to do and the ones who follow what AI tells them to do. And we want to prepare the next generation to have more and more embryologists who are capable to tell AI what to do. Secondly, we are hoping to help clinics, and this is helping the current generation. So how can we help the clinics, the current embryologists, understand AI? How can we help them be part of the AI evolution that's coming to all of us? We are helping the AI developers, the many AI companies from around the world, to try and create an easier path to bring their brilliant ideas into clinical practice. And lastly, we're also in talks with some country-wide regulators to try and figure out if there are ways that this can be used to enhance the regulatory process as well. So to support clinics, we do this using modern methods for automated data capture and processing. And there's a journey for AI. A lot of people come to me and they say, Cristina, we want you to help us come into the AI journey. And then when I come to the clinic, the whole clinic is paper-based. So the very first step we need to think of is you need to figure out how to digitize all your information. And this is partly why we're having this seminar today. So how you collect your data, you should become paper phobic. You need to get to the point where everything is digitized so that you can learn from your data faster, so that no information is lost that could be useful for yourself or for your patients. You then go into data validation and processing, you go into, and once you get to that point, you're then able to start building your AI algorithms and trying to determine how they can, whether they work or not. The testing is a whole other aspect. And what we're seeing today is that people who are building AI are testing on what the data they have access to, which is limited. And we want to see it starting with single clinic data, moving on to multiple clinics, and then getting to the point where the algorithms get accreditation, get deployed, And then there's the ongoing validation, ensuring that the algorithm is maintained and updated over time. We also want to support researchers at the clinics to understand how to visualize their data and how to validate their data. And when they get this point, we want to get them to understand how to create deep learning tools, so that only then can they be part and understand how to reap the benefits that come from AI: increased consistency, reduced risk and error, increased efficacy, or increased efficiency as well. Efficiency is twice because it's very important. And then you have the support of AI researchers on validating the deep learning tools, because we need to step away from the pyramid of evidence-based medicine, which is completely designed around intervention. And we need to better understand what is really the best way that we should be assessing prognostic tools, not just AI, but time-lapse, PGT, or any other tool that we're using to determine a prediction of whether this embryo is going to lead to a baby or not, whether this patient is going to become pregnant or not, whether she's going to miscarry or not. Any of these prognostic tools are going to have a slightly different route than an intervention. And the prognostic AI tools are going to have slightly different vocabulary. It's not an exposure, it's input. It's not an outcome, it's output. We don't go through a cross-sectional study. You do training and validation, which then goes on to a blind test, a true blind test, a multi-center blind test, until eventually we have a large-scale cohort study, which we're hoping to get to the point where we don't have just thousands of images of embryos, but millions if we start connecting at the global level, which is where it should be. We want to support AI developers to incorporate their AI-based tools into clinical practice to benefit not only patients, but the IVF professionals as well. We have put together this is not from Apricity, this is me personally, but we kind of organized, and I've spoken to a lot of my colleagues, and we've come together to put together a consensus on the standards for data sharing. And this is going to be happening at ESHRE, where we're hoping that in the context of these new technologies that are coming today around blockchain, we need some specific standards which are for the IVF field, so that we can better understand how to move forward with these technologies. So the Apricity Data Hub has a long journey ahead to kind of bring this into full fruition. So I'm hoping that the Data Hub will be the baseline technology for data-driven technologies in fertility to evolve. It's kind of like a playground for AI to promote multi-center collaborative work, not just at the national level, but at an international level, and to properly build and validate new AI algorithms before they're used clinically, reducing the cost of data-driven technologies. There's three main areas that I want to see an improvement in terms of efficiency, so that we can tackle the accessibility to treatment. In terms of the patient experience, I want to see patients more empowered by the information that comes from their treatment. And also about consistency in practice. And hopefully when we get all this together, we can increase the success rates to patients. I want to thank the amazing team at Apricity, and in particular, Jerome Chambos, Céline Jacques, and Chris Alexandre Pena, who have made the Apricity Data Hub a reality. So thank you very much.